Hey, this is Brock from Eagle Crest Studios, and today I'm going to show how we can turn these three boards into a beautiful 3D cutting board. So the first thing we're going to do is to turn our table saw to a 30-degree angle. And what this is going to do, it's actually going to tilt the blade of the saw so we're not cutting straight, but we're actually cutting at an angle. So as you can see here, as we turn that, it turns the blade. Now the first thing we're going to do here after we tilt the blade is we're going to cut the first length of the board. Now this is the maple we have right here, and as you can see I did not cut deep enough because the blade wasn't high enough. So I stopped the blade, restarted it, cranked it up higher, so now I'm actually cutting through the entire board. Now this first cut, as you can see, is at a 30-degree angle, and what we're going to do now is measure the length of that board to see how long it is, and this is roughly 7/8 as you can see there. Now what we're going to do is measure the top of the board to 7/8 so that we can cut the exact same distance and have all four sides of our board be the same length. So now we're ripping the first maple piece again here, and once you make this cut you'll actually be able to see the entire piece in its complete form. And while it might not look like much right now, you're wondering how is this going to be a 3D image. Once all the pieces are together, you will see how these diamond-shaped pieces come together to create a 3D image. Next, we are moving on to ripping the oak piece. So I'm showing you a different angle here so you can see how the fence is actually used to press against the wood to keep it straight. So I'm using both a hand push here as well as my hand, making sure to keep away from the blade because that would not be good if I end up hitting that. And what this is allowing me to do is get a nice straight edge on that oak board. So now that we already have the cut, I'm adjusting the fence back to that 7/8 distance from the blade. And you want to make sure you actually include the width of the blade. In this case, it's roughly 1/8. So I'm going almost to 1 inch here to get that nice straight cut with a nice angle and making sure that all four sides of this board are now the same size. So here you'll see as I put the oak and the maple pieces together, you're starting to see how that shape is going to go. Now all we need is this last black walnut, which is my favorite type of wood, as you can see I'm cutting here. And what this is going to do is it's going to be the final piece for us, and you'll start to see the 3D image come together. So I took this rip, as you can see here, in the best angle I think to see the design, and we're keeping all of our scrap wood, as I may note, because we'll be using that for another project later. But once again, I'm measuring here the 7/8 distance, but I'm using it from the 2 marker because it's a little bit easier to see than using it directly from the edge of the tape measure. So I'm making my last cut here, and I thought it'd be cool to do a slow-mo. There wasn't as much sawdust as I was expecting. I thought it'd be kind of cool, but this is at least a neat way for you to see how the blade is actually entering into the wood and giving that parallelogram that we were talking about earlier. Now once this cut is done, we'll see here in a few moments how the last piece of this wood makes the actual hexagon, which is a 6-sided object, which is what we're going to be using for our end grain cutting board. So as I promised, we're going to finally see this hexagon design coming in, and as we placed all 3 pieces together, you can see that very nice design. We got a really good cut on all of these, so they're very, very tight joint, which is important for the glue up. If you ever were to have a case where your joints were not very tight, you could use sandpaper or a rasp to get them a little bit tighter. But now since we've got a good cut, we're going to use some Titebond glue to connect the two. What we're doing here is putting it on the board and then spreading it over with my finger to make sure it's completely covered. Some people recommend using a paintbrush. However, if you have one, great. If not, a finger works great. Now what I'm doing here also is actually squeezing this glue out so you can see it's a nice tight seal. It's very even across the path. If we saw splotches where there was not glue coming out, that would be a big concern. Now the last part here is to add the third piece. So I have the 2 clamped in, and I'm adding this third piece on top. And then from what I'm going to do here is clamp it from the top to the bottom. Now right now I'm showing I have 2 clamps on the side as well as 1 in the middle with a piece of wood here. This is just a scrap piece of wood so I don't beat up my actual wood project with the clamp. But if you do not have this, I'm going to show you in a few moments another way you can actually clamp this using duct tape. And I found this method to actually be better. So here's the second glue up, and like I said, we're going to show you how to use duct tape. So this is just the standard duct tape you can get from the store, and what we're going to do is to be wrapping each of the ends as well as the middle very tightly. So what we're doing here is we're connecting on one end, wrapping it around. I'm going to go to the middle here and gives you a nice close-up so you can see we got to squeeze it tight with our hand and then wrap it tight with duct tape. And I know all the woodworkers out there are probably going to be upset that I'm using duct tape, but I want to show an option for maybe new woodworkers who do not have access to clamps, or if you're worried about your clamps getting glue on them, or just have them wrapped up in other projects as I do currently. So you can see that's a nice tight edge. We got them all squeezed up. And what we also want to do is make sure our end is cleaned up, because that's just less work we have to clean up later. But you'll see we also end up having to do some glue sanding as well as some chiseling later, but that's more the fun part here. So now we have the two side by side, one with the clamps, one with the tape. We will see which one works better. So now it's the next day. You can see it's cold out, but I'm still wearing shorts. And what we're going to do, we're checking out the work we did here. As you can see, we had very good glue ups on both the clamps as well as the tape job. The only thing I'd say about the tape is that it is a little bit of a pain to get off, but you know, with a little bit of ingenuity, a little bit of persistence, and maybe a little bit of sandpaper later, we'll be able to get all this off in not too bad of a time. So what we're doing here, as I said, we're going to have some glue marks that we have on there, and we got to get rid of those. So what I'm doing is just clamping it down into a simple workbench and going to be sanding and scraping everything off. Now, I'm not going to talk during this time because some people love the sound of this, so I'll just keep quiet. So what I'm using here is a wood chisel, and what this is doing is just popping off all of the extra glue we have on there, and then I'm touching it up with a sandpaper. This is actually for an orbital sander, but I grabbed it because, hey, why not? Now while I'm cleaning the rest of this up, I do have to ask if you got any value out of this video so far. I really appreciate it if you could like and subscribe. It's the only way to grow the channel right now, and we're going to be releasing a lot more interesting builds, and your help and support really goes a long way. Now here's where the fun part comes in. So we're using a chop saw, and I'm measuring roughly 1.5 inches for the thickness of the board. And I want to note here that piece of wood on the right is actually clamped in, and this is called a stop block. So rather than having to measure every individual piece, I can just cut one piece, move it out of the way, push the actual other piece of wood in, and it stops exactly where I need it. This makes it very efficient when I'm cutting a lot of pieces. And as you can see here, they're the same thickness, they have the same design, and we're starting to see how our piece is going to be coming together to make that actual 3D design. So we're going to continue to chop the rest of these. I did this for both the pieces and then actually made 2 other pieces because I realized I need a little bit more wood for the stuff I'm building. But this is a really good and efficient way to cut through all the wood you need to in a short amount of time, very clean and accurate cuts. And the one thing I would say too is that when you're cutting this, I'm showing a different angle here, you want to make sure you're cutting straight on. My original piece had roughly a 3-degree angle, so I squared that up before cutting everything. Now this part's pretty boring, but just cutting off all the burrs. And now we get to see the actual beautiful piece starting to come together. If you look, you can start to see the 3D pattern laid out, and it's really, really exciting to see all of this come together and getting ready for the next step of the very challenging but exciting glue up. So before we actually glue it down, we're going to put down a piece of paper so we don't have any of our boards sticking to the actual plywood below. This makes it a lot easier to peel up, as you'll see later. So now we're just starting to glue 3 of the sides. What we're doing here is we want to glue the outside because that's just a waste of glue, but if you do, it's not a big deal because we'll be cutting it off later. Make sure to stack everything in the exact same directions and then wrap it up with some duct tape, since clamping really isn't an option here. So next you see I have a little bit of glue and some sandpaper, and what we're doing is sanding everything down and mixing that together, because this sawdust and glue is actually making a great combo to cover up any of the cracks we have in our board. Since these are not going to be completely tight, this is a great way to fill in anything you have. Now the next day we let it dry and we tear it up as it came up very easily. Tape came off just as I expected, and we have a nice, strong, and solid glue up. Very, very happy with that. Next, we're just cutting off the edges of the four sides. This is something you want to make sure you do it correctly, but do not stress about it. We're also going to be sanding the edges as well, so it shouldn't be too stressful if they are not completely clean, just as long as they're straight. So now that we have 3 of the edges cut, we're cutting this last one here, and now we have a perfectly square board. So we're going to do a quick sanding on top to make sure everything is clean. This is the 60, 80, and then 120 grit. Then from there, we are actually going to do what's called a pop. So we're actually spraying the board with water, and this is one, not only good so the wood actually pops and it gets a little furry, and then you sand it again, but 2, you can actually see any areas where there's glue up where I missed the sanding, and you can go back and do that. So you want to let it dry for about 24 hours and then sand it again, get it all cleaned up so we're in a good spot. Now that we have our board almost ready, we are going to be adding this feed and wax food safe grade cutting board oil. So what this is, it's a wax oil mix that's going to not only help seal in the wood, but also keep the moisture out. Obviously, we'll be cutting it and having chemicals such as acids from fruit and any soap you have on there as well. This will help keep everything nice and clean and protect the wood. So as you can see here, it really, really makes that black walnut pop, which is my personal favorite. And we'll just spread this right in there, work it in with our towel, enjoy that color, and really see the board come to life. The 3D figures are now starting to finally show, and you can really, really see why I like this design and why I like using this wood. It just looks beautiful, it looks nice and clean, and I'm just very excited with how this turned out. So I'm going to show you right now a close-up of this. So you can see how gray and plain this wood is looking right now. And then we're going to add a little bit of this wax in there, just mix it all around. And then we're getting our cloth, this is just a standard cloth, and wiping it in. And you can really, really see that shine and that pop from that color. So it's really exciting. You can see I have a little bit of an area where I'm going to go back and sand because the finish is not taking exactly how it should. That's an area of glue that I missed earlier. But other than that, it looks really good. And there you have it, a 3D cutting board. Hope you guys enjoyed the video, and stay tuned for more. Thanks.